Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Laborless, an immigration tech startup that automates H-1B compliance, and the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a marketing agency for the immigration industry and, of course, brings you the show. Today is episode number 92. I'm super excited. We talk to all entrepreneurs across the industry, folks who've been in the industry for a long time, folks who are at the growth stage, and folks who are really just starting their journey. And today we have a really exciting entrepreneur who has just recently launched an awesome new immigration tech company that's AI focused and service focused and technology focused, and we're going to dive into it. Our guest today is Ramiro Roballos. He is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Tukki.ai. It's spelled Tukki, an immigration tech platform that, their goal is to effectively marry technology with the human touch, right? So provide a really good tech service with human immigration attorneys in the background, helping clients and companies. I'm excited to learn about his story and, how Tukki came about. And then, of course, we're going to learn about what the company does. Before we jump in, I just want to thank the main sponsor of this episode of the GMI Rocket Show, which is Lex Reception. So Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service, from answering phone calls and messages in real time to scheduling appointments. Lex Reception provides immigration law firm clients with 24/7 legal answering specialists, so you, the immigration lawyer, don't have to worry about missing a phone call from a client or prospect. Lex Reception can also proactively reach out to prospective clients for you who fill out a form on your website or reach out to you some other way. They've got a lot of integrations with tech platforms that you're probably using already, such as Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and more, and will work with you with your current tech stack. So Lex Reception is offering $250 off your first month of service for folks who listen to the GMI Rocket Show. So if you're interested, check out the link in the show description or reach out to Lex Reception on your own and tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. So without further ado, Ramiro, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited for this conversation. And how's it going?
Thanks, Roman. Thanks for having me. It's going great. Thank you.
And you're in Miami.
I am in Miami.
Yes. Yeah, and we're in New York City. I was thinking, I actually saw somebody this morning driving with Florida license plates, and I was like, "What are you doing here?" It's usually the other way around. You're supposed to be down in Miami right now. So I'm excited to kind of dive into your history, your background, sort of your journey as an immigrant to the U.S. And I'd like to really start at the very beginning and sort of learn about the person, learn about the guest in their life. So you grew up in Argentina, right? And did you grow up in Buenos Aires, or you grew up somewhere else, like nearby?
No, Buenos Aires. Originally from Buenos Aires. Spent most of my life there until 4 years when I moved to the U.S.
Wow. I've been there. I have a number of longtime friends in Buenos Aires, and I visited once. Actually, that was my post-bar trip. A lot of my friends went to Bali, Indonesia, and relax for a week. I took intensive Spanish classes in Buenos Aires. It was awesome. I loved it so much. I didn't even see the rest of the country. It's such a big, beautiful country, Argentina. I stayed in the city, so I loved it there. We can probably have a whole show about how good the pizza is, and this is coming from a New Yorker, by the way. So you grew up in Buenos Aires. You went to school there. Were you, I like to ask this of guests, were you the kind of kid, I guess, or maybe teenager that thought about business? Were you the lemonade stand, baseball trading kind of kid, or just sort of studies and school and that's it?
I mean, kind of, yes. In a sense, I think yes, I definitely was. Not the traditional business, I guess, right? As you know, right? Because when we started talking and you saw on my LinkedIn, right? I originally studied music, right? So my major was first on musical composition and then orchestral conducting, right? But even then, right? I built my own orchestra. I was raising funds from people, and I was organizing shows with venues, and I was already like being an entrepreneur, but in another area. Or then I had like a shows company that we did shows for like the best hotels in Buenos Aires, and organized like different groups. So there was always this entrepreneurial spirit of like building stuff, but not so traditional in the sense that it was all around music, right? But yeah,
How old were you when you started to do this? So you started learning music probably since you were very young.
Yeah, I started with the guitar, I think at 8 or 9, and then I changed to piano, I think at 14 or 15, and composition across it. And then as soon as I finished high school, I went to university for musical composition, classical music composition, and I spent some years playing the piano at a tango band that my brother was leading at the time, and
Wow.
we were doing like international tours with the tango
Wow.
quintet and dancers and the whole thing, singers. And then I started moving more towards the classical music, right? The musical composition, and then orchestral conducting, and that world, right?
Let me ask you something. And by the way, I'm ignorant here, so forgive me if this question is dumb. Would you look at the composer as sort of like the manager, like the director of the team, and the team specializes in their own instrument? Because I think about I wonder if, like, okay, you did one instrument and you did another instrument, and then in my head I just made up this story in my head, but because you run your own company, you obviously worked in management consulting. I feel like you're a high level thinker, like you're probably the kind of person who likes to see the big picture. So in my head I imagined you as like a younger person playing this instrument, that instrument. You're like, you know what, I don't want to be the regular person playing the instrument. I want to organize all of the instruments together. I want to be at the management level. Is that relevant at all, or am I sort of totally making up that analogy?
No, I think that role is somewhat divided between the composer and the orchestra conductor, right? Like the composer, it's kind of the R&D guy, right? Like you create what is supposed to be. You're designing the blueprints, right? Or the engineer, if you will, or the architect, right? Like you are the one like setting the foundations or creating or saying like, okay, this is the blueprint, this is what you need to do. But then in terms of like execution and organizing and managing, I would say maybe the orchestra conductor is way more similar to that, because you are there. I mean, you have your blueprint, right? Like you have a plan, you have a sheet of paper like that you need to interpret, but it's up to you, right? To be there. Like the musicians don't usually talk with the composer, right? Like it's except in very rare circumstances, right? You have no idea, right? So it's kind of the orchestra conductor that is like the one that needs to analyze everything and make up decisions, and then be there in the ground, right? Like organizing the full orchestra and making decisions about how to do stuff, right? So in that sense, conducting has a lot of very, very similar things to managing like a company or managing people, right?
So the composer is like, I wouldn't say the product manager, but like you said, they're on the development side.
Yeah.
And then the conductor sort of is the one who helps implement it in terms of getting all the ducks in a row and managing all the teams. And then the instruments, the individual players are sort of doing tasks along the way, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, I've never thought about that in that way as a product manager, but I guess you're right? Because it's kind of like you are the one defining the stories and the features. And I mean, you are not the one implementing them, but you are the one, writing the guidelines, the user stories in Jira or whatever, like saying, hey, this should be like this, and these are the important stuff and whatever. And you give all the guidelines. And then in a sense, yeah, you could argue that, developers and designers are kind of the, musicians like doing that, right? But yeah, like definitely the conductor is way more closer to the actual execution and being there and like operations and whatnot, right?
What a beautiful interpretation of classical music. Business requirements, hierarchy. No, I've thought about that quite a bit before in my life in various times, but I've never had the opportunity to ask somebody who actually understands. So I was kind of curious. So you played music. I think to your point, very much you were an entrepreneur. I mean, entrepreneur doesn't mean that you're necessarily making money on an individual transaction. in my view, it's somebody who has a, some sort of a goal in mind or a project in mind, and they put the different pieces in play or into action to reach that goal or to make that project come to life. You had to raise funds. I'm sure you had to find musicians, find venues, or at least work with people to do that kind of a thing. You were leading. You were a leader of something, even though it wasn't, a lemonade stand or a t-shirt company or something. So let me ask you this. What do you think, and maybe there's no good answer to it right now, what do you think sort of drove you to have the confidence or the, ability to just go for it, just, create this orchestra and go find a venue and be confident that they want to have you there and that the music will be good?
So for me, it was out of necessity, right? So I as I told you, I didn't start as an orchestra conductor. I started more on the pianist side and the composer side. So actually, when I was finishing my musical composition degree, I realized that most great composers in history that I loved had been conductors as well, right? And at the time, I thought, like, look, this cannot be a coincidence, right? And when you're a conductor, you are forced to learn. You're forced to learn the music to a level that you are typically not required if you're not necessarily conducting. Because when you're conducting, you need to understand exactly what every instrument is doing, like what's the typical, the technical possibilities and how it sounds and how to interpret all these things. So I said, look, like, if I want to become a better composer, I should study orchestral conducting, right? I didn't want to become an orchestra conductor, but I wanted to know more just to become a better composer. So then I started my second degree on another university on conducting. But the thing is, the first time I was conducting the university orchestra, I was like, holy, this is awesome. Like just being in the middle of an orchestra, like moving your hands and just, things happening. And being in the middle of it all, like it was completely awesome. So after that initial day, I was like, no, like I need to do this, right? I need to drop composing. I need to do this now. Like this is completely awesome. I've never experienced something like this. So then my whole plan switched, right, to becoming a conductor, and maybe sure, like composing my own things to conduct them, but mainly becoming a conductor. So after a few months of doing that, I realized it was really, really hard to get conducting opportunities because there's, like, if you compare the number of orchestras available and the number of conductors, like there's a huge variance, right? A huge difference, right? There's so many people trying to conduct orchestras, especially young people. I was maybe 23, 24 at the time. And so many few orchestras, because having an orchestra is an expensive thing, right? You need like 40, 50 musicians, instruments, a venue, like a lot of things. So when I started understanding like what was the typical journey of an orchestra conductor student, typically you would need to study for 3 or 4 years, maybe conduct very small things. Eventually, maybe you would get like an assistant place in 4 or 5 years time, and then maybe in 3 or 4 more years you would end up conducting, right? So I was like, dude, I cannot wait 8 years to become a conductor,
Right.
So my rationale was like, look, if there's like not an orchestra that's going to hire me because I've been studying conducting for 5 months and that's fair, then I should create my own, and that's the other way of doing this. So at that time, I went to a platform similar to Kickstarter in Argentina. So I started, driving everyone crazy, to help me, to fund me with through this Kickstarter in Argentina. So I raised some funds. With that, I was able to pay for an orchestra. We did some promotional material. And then with that, I went to some places and I got some more money. And then I convinced people to give us some venues and start playing. And that's how it started, right? And so that was great. We did a few concerts, but I really wanted to go bigger than that, right? So I said, okay, I want to play in this particular venue. It's one of the most important private venues, right, in Buenos Aires. It's called Amihai. It's a place, a very, very nice, a Jewish temple actually that has like a concert hall inside that is awesome. But there was no way, right, that they were going to give me, and my just minted orchestra like a place there, right? So I figured that if I had like some very awesome musicians, right, like playing a soloist, like maybe they would listen to me. So I wanted to get like a particular violinist, and I started, taking classes with a pianist that played with him often, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, I said, like, look, I have this orchestra, like, I'm thinking of like having a very interesting, concert here in this venue. I want to do a really nice piece, like, looking for soloists. And she was like, look, we really want to do the triple concerto from Beethoven. We have never done it, the two of us. Like, we would be super open to do it with you, right? Because we want to do that piece, right? And we haven't had the possibility of doing it. I was like, sure, and they brought like the best cello player in the country as well, right? Because of course they're friends, like they're all like superstars and musicians.
Yeah.
So once I got those three guys, then I went to the venue, right? And I said, like, look, like I have this, these three soloists, we are accompanying them. Like, we want to do this concert in your hall. And they were like, sure, we love them. Like, we love those musicians. We want to have you, right? So we got the venue and we got the musicians. And then once we had both of them, then I started going, raising funds for that. But that's different, right? Because you have a great venue, you have great soloists, and then getting the money eventually happened. And we had a really, really great concert, right? So it was an interesting year. Like, that's the happy story. In between, there were like a lot of ups and downs, like multiple times where the concert was almost canceled and a lot of challenges in between. But after that, I think it was a little easier, and I started having invitations to conduct and everything, and that kind of like kickstarted my career as a conductor. But those were kind of the first 18 months, I guess.
So 2 questions for you, and this is fascinating for anybody who's listening. Is like, I thought this was going to be a show about immigration technology, and here we are talking about conducting an orchestra. Obviously, the parallels are, they're clear as day, especially, or really anybody who's starting a business. Did you take the piano class because you knew that teacher played with the violinist you wanted?
Yeah.
Or did you actually also want to take the piano class to get better at him?
I mean, both.
Yeah.
It was, I also like learned a ton from those classes.
Sure.
But I think it was like more than 50%, because I knew she was playing with him. And it was the best time to, the best way of like just getting a relationship and learning like from her, etc. And then
I think that's so clever, because you're, it's a really sort of backdoor way to build a relationship, but you're doing it in a way. First of all, there's no guarantee. You can take the class and the person might say, no, get out of my.
Yeah. And she was a great piano player, though. Like, I was learning anyway. Like,
exactly.
The worst case scenario was awesome anyway. But yeah, there is the risk.
It's a great lesson, because I think a lot of founders, a lot of entrepreneurs, especially at the early stages, they don't have the relationships. They try to figure out how to build their relationships, but they don't think outside the box, right? And I think what you did was sort of you did your homework. You understood how the network works, and you thought to yourself, what's a genuine way that I can get in there, given that I'm still maybe early on in my career and people don't know me necessarily. So I love that. And the second thing I was going to ask you was, how did the conducting go? You were still relatively green, and you put together this whole enterprise. You're obviously very successful and creative in doing that. How did the actual conducting go?
No, it went well. I mean, every year, that I conducted a new concert, and I watched my previous year conducting, I was like, hell, that was horrible. Like
right.
Every time, like, because that means anyway that you are going in the right direction. But yeah, that's a thing with conducting. Like, if you're a pianist, or if you're an oboe player or a violinist, like, you can learn on your own. Like, there's not a need for someone to see how you're making mistakes. When you're conducting, you don't have that luxury. Like, you cannot learn how to conduct on your own. Like, you need an actual orchestra. Like, there's things you can do to improve, but at some point, it's like, if you want to swim, you need to jump on a pool. Like, if you want to conduct an orchestra, you need to learn by doing so, right? So it's it's a challenging journey, because you are learning in front of like well-seasoned musicians that maybe have 20 years of experience, and they play the musical piece you're conducting for the 20th time, and it's your first, and you're doing some stupid mistake. So it has its own challenges and interesting things. you get used to that. You get used to failing in public, and that's okay. And it's going to happen, and you need to learn how to manage that, right? Yeah, you're going to make mistakes. It's impossible not to make mistakes. That particular concert went really, really well. But during rehearsals, of course, right? Like you make some mistakes and you do things. But I think it was a great training in that sense, to not be afraid of being sorry, of being mistaken, of doing a mistake, of making a mistake, doing something wrong, in front of everyone, right? Literally in front of everyone.
Right.
Like the musicians or the audience, right? That particular concert, I think we had, like, I don't know, 400 people come
Wow.
to see the concert. So it was pretty packed, right? And
Yeah.
everyone I knew, from like friends and family, but also like people from the musical space, right?
Community. Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, you get used to that, and I think that's a great training. Like, in general, I think being a musician and being on a stage and making mistakes, very public mistakes, right? I think it's a great training. That's what I think. Kids learning music, any musical instrument, and just playing in front of people is just such a great thing, right? Even if you don't play anymore ever in your life, I think it teaches you so much, right? About exposing something about yourself, about exposing something emotional about yourself. It's like you're not just performing something like a math problem. You're just trying to express something, and trying to do so in front of a lot of people that might say that was horrible, right? And you need to be okay with that and do it, right? So I think it was a great experience overall.
And the training, of course, that every week, every day, the practice that you put into it that nobody sees. I want to take a pause. We just have a comment here from Marianne, who says, to see Michael Tilson Thomas conduct the San Francisco Orchestra is pure joy. How unfortunate for us that he retired. Yeah, thanks, Marianne, for the comment. Especially, again, we haven't even touched on the quote unquote business stuff yet, although there are so many amazing lessons here. So thank you, Marianne, for the comment. So all of this is happening. Is there some part of your brain that's starting to think about business? Because you obviously do go back to school, you do get your MBA, I think in Buenos Aires, although you did do a stint in Chicago. You went to do like a broad program during business school.
I exchanged as part of the MBA program in Buenos Aires.
Right. So talk a little bit about that transition. I mean, it sounds like you were doing everything right for a great career in music. So what made you want to take this route?
So similar to when I moved from composing to conducting, that I wasn't looking to change careers, right? To change from a composer to a conductor. I was at the time planning to go to Germany to do a master's in orchestra conducting, right? So I started learning German, right, and all of those things, and preparing myself. And I was married at the time with 2 kids already, so we had to have a source of income, right, to pay the bills while I was doing like a 2-year master's in Germany. So we figured that we could open a music school, right? So while I was conducting, we opened a music school from scratch while I was studying for Germany. And I started loving the experience, like similar to the other stuff. Like I started seeing like how much I enjoyed, and I learned how to do a website, because I wasn't really convinced by any of the people I hired to do so. And I learned how to do Google ads and Facebook ads, and do marketing campaigns. I started to hire people and get clients and all of these things, right? Customers, students. So that was going great, right? We scaled it from 0 to 200 students, I think. Wow. And we were doing really great. And at some point, I met with one of the teachers from Germany, right? Actually, he was from Uruguay, and he came for holidays to Uruguay. And I went, from Buenos Aires to, I think it was Montevideo, like their capital, just for the day. It was like a 4 or 5 hour trip with about everything, just to have a lunch with him, right, and talk with him. And I went there. Now after COVID, it's like a crazy thing, because like, why wouldn't you do like a Zoom meeting, right? But at the time, right, it was like not so common, and people, those things were. This was maybe 2016, And at the time, if you wanted to really talk with someone, like you went there, right? So I traveled for the 4 or 5 hours. I went there. I bought him lunch, and I talked with him for 2 hours, right? To learn more, to know exactly like how to prepare myself better, etc. But after the lunch finished, I was like, dude, I don't want to do this. Like, this is not what I want to do. I don't want to spend the next 2 years of my life doing this, right? Like, I don't think it's interesting to learn what they are teaching here, or interesting for me, right? For sure, super valuable, but just not for what I wanted to do, right? So then, after being preparing myself for like 18 months or more, learning German, building a business to support myself in Germany and everything, and like convincing my wife and like everything, I all of a sudden was like super lost, right? Because I have been working towards something for a long time, and now that something was not happening, right? So for a few months, I was completely lost, right? Like it was like if you're about to do something and everything is like towards that goal, and then the goal disappears. It's like, okay, what do I do now, right? I was a little bit lost. So I wanted to study something. Like I had already set my mind to do something, to study something, to learn something more, right? And I was like, look, I'm doing this thing about the music school. I'm really enjoying it. I've never taken like an accounting class in my life or a finance class in my life. Maybe it's good, right? To do some course on finance, or some course on something, on marketing, on something, right? That course on marketing in less than 24 hours scaled to like looking for MBAs. And yeah, I don't do a great deal with like gray areas. Like I'm typically a little extremist,
If you're doing it, you're doing it
Yeah,
110%.
exactly. I was like, dude, if I do it, like let's do it for real.
Yeah.
So I applied for this music school, not music schools, for this MBA in Argentina, one of the best there were. And I didn't have a bunch of money back then. So I was like, look, like they had a 50% scholarship based on, like, I don't know if it was ability, or I don't know what was the criteria, but I was like, look, I don't want to sound disrespectful, but either I get the scholarship or I cannot do it. Like, it's not that I'm trying to negotiate with you or pressure you. It's like, I honestly cannot do it, right? I did exams, I went through the interviews, everything, and I got accepted and I got the scholarship. And I was like, okay, I might hate this, right? The reality is, like, I might go here, like, every class I've had so far in my life was about music, right? So I had no idea what was like to be in a finance class, right? I didn't even know like what EBITDA was or anything, right? So I went there and I loved it, right? It was like awesome. Like I had a ton of fun. And while originally I went there to become a better a music entrepreneur, when I was finishing the MBA, similar when I was finishing composing, the composing career, I was like, hey, this is great, but it's super theoretical. Maybe I should have like some practical experience in businesses before continuing with my new music endeavors, right? Or businesses. And then I started looking for like alternatives, and I found out what McKinsey was and what management consultancy was. Like I didn't know before. And I was like, hey, this sounds like a great place, right? Like you get to work with multiple companies, with multiple type of projects in multiple countries. So I studied for like 3 or 4 months preparing cases and everything. I had to prepare cases with my dad because I didn't know anyone that was interested. Typically you find like a cohort of people, right? Like, in the university, like 3 or 4 people want to do consulting, and then they prepare themselves, or there's like a consulting club. In my case, it was my dad, right? So I drove my dad crazy. I think we practiced like 60 cases, maybe.
Wow.
And then, yeah, people typically practice like 10 or 15 when they are like diligent. Like in my case, I wasn't doing so great at first, so I had to practice more. So I joined McKinsey, and that's how. And then McKinsey same, right? Hey, I don't know if I'm going to love it or hate it. Let's see. And then I really loved it. It was a great experience. And that was back in Buenos Aires. And yeah, that was how the transition from musician to consultant was.
I want to take a quick just pause for a second, because a specific question I want to ask you is about your experience going to the U.S. first during your MBA program, and
Yeah.
then about your transition into the U.S. while you were at McKinsey. But before we get there, I just want to just do a quick thank you to the second sponsor of this episode, which is DocketWise. Many of the listeners probably have heard of and know DocketWise. DocketWise is an all-in-one immigration case management platform with best-in-class immigration forms, super customizable questionnaires, great industry-leading integrations, including with Laborless, actually, my startup. And, they have really good customer service. They were on this show, featured on the show, and I really like the team, so I'm really happy that they're supporting this podcast. And I actually really like that they have a good blog and a podcast themselves, so I like the content they create. So for folks who are listening, check out DocketWise. I have a link in the notes of the show, or just go to docketwise.com and reach out to them and say that you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. So okay, the question for you is, and maybe there wasn't anything, but your first experience with immigration, I suspect, because you didn't actually move to Germany, right? You set everything up for it, but you didn't move. So the first time, as far as I can tell, that you kind of moved for a for a non-vacation purpose is you went to Kellogg School of Business in Chicago during your MBA program. I'm assuming on an F1 student visa.
J1, actually.
A J1. Okay.
Yeah.
So was there anything about that experience that impacted you, or did it feel very smooth because the university handled it and you just kind of came here, did your thing?
So I was accepted into McKinsey in December, and then I went to Kellogg in January, right? So I already knew I was starting in McKinsey a few months later. So with my wife, we already had the idea of emigrating at some point, and we chatted about the fact that this could be like a trial, right? Kind of a free trial of the experience of living abroad and seeing how it went, right? So in that sense, I was pretty much thinking about that every time, right? How do I feel here? Would I live here? Would I, am I missing home? Do I want to go back to Buenos Aires? Am I fine here? So the short answer was we felt great, right? It was no, this is great. Maybe not that weather in winter in Chicago, but the idea of living here felt great, and the experience was awesome, right? So as soon as we came back, I already started making the plans with McKinsey to look at some point. I'm going to come here to the US, right? It took some time. It required 2 years actually between I had to get a promotion.
Yeah.
There were certain things you had to accomplish before being able to move. But yeah, that was definitely a great experience to kind of taste how it feels to be here in the US and in another country. And finally, 2 years later, actually almost exactly 2 years later, we were coming to Miami on an L1 visa.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So, right. So you came on a J1 first, tried it out, went back, of course, did work for McKinsey back from home, and then eventually through whatever their processes were able to move to the US on an L1.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I guess you eventually, obviously you eventually got into the immigration space. I'm assuming at this time you were still just all in at McKinsey. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work you did there, or at the very least, what you learned? What were the types of projects you worked on?
Yeah. So for the first 2 years, I did a little bit of everything, right? And that's what I was looking for, right? I work with airlines, I work with banks, I work with private equity companies, I work with gas distributors, with telecom providers, with media companies, and that was exactly what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to really learn from so many industries, and procurement, marketing, operations, marketing, and M&As, whatever. But after the initial 2 years, I came to McKinsey to learn how to become a better entrepreneur, right? So I wanted to focus more on building companies. So as soon as I came to the US, I started to focus way more on a practice called Leap by McKinsey, that is focused on building businesses and companies for other big companies, right? So for example, let's say a bank wants to build a fintech from scratch, right? They want to build a separate entity that is a completely new company with new people. And it's actually the experience of building a startup but you have like a parent company. And in this case, you have McKinsey consultants helping you build it from scratch. The initial 6 months, maybe the McKinsey team is doing like 80% of the work, and you are actually doing the work, and we bring our engineers and whatever. And then month by month, you start hiring more people and letting coaching them and leaving. And also on the fuel practice, that is the practice that works with startups, typically later stage startups, but also working with them, helping them expand, right? So for the last 3 years that I was at McKinsey, I was basically either building a new company for a larger company, or working with a later stage startup, expanding, moving to another country, reorganizing or whatnot, right?
So it sounds like it gave you such a broad variety of experiences in terms of industry, type of work, goals, probably going from working within large companies to scaling small companies. Do you feel like you took to that pretty well? I mean, it feels like if I look back on even just what you shared today, you built a business in music, you built a school, right? Without even kind of thinking about being a business person. And then when you entered the consultancy world, you started working on other industries. Did you feel at any point that you wanted to go back and do something again of your own? Or I guess, you know what, I'll ask another question, or maybe this is part of the same question. Did you ever look at yourself as a business built, like as a builder, as an entrepreneur, or were you more of like just trying to go to the next stage in your career and accidentally on the way building stuff that worked?
Oh no, I always saw myself as a builder. Like I love to build
Okay.
stuff. And when I joined McKinsey, I actually never thought I was going to stay for so long.
Mm.
But then with the moving to the US and everything, like it extended. But even when I was with my clients, right, like actually some piece of negative feedback I sometimes got from like McKinsey senior partners or partners was like that I was too involved, right? That we were like consultants, and there's some things that you don't need to push so hard, right? Because sometimes I would think that, hey, this is wrong, like this is going to go wrong for the business, and I would tell the CEO like, hey, this is wrong, and they would tell me like, I want to do it anyway, and I would like continue pushing every time until the senior partner was like, dude, like stop, like you're a consultant, you're not the CEO, like you need to back off a little bit. And they were right, actually. Like it was not my place, but actually what I wanted to become is I wanted to be the CEO, and I wanted to be completely involved. And that was a good learning from being a consultant, right? Like I learned a ton of things, but at some point it's very different to be the consultant than being the actual P&L responsible P&L owner, right? Like, and you have other responsibilities and other decisions to make. And look, I think both are great, right? Depends on what you enjoy the most. But definitely, in my case, I enjoy the most like being the actual decision owner with the responsibilities and burdens it comes with it. But I really enjoy, being in the middle of it all, right?
Yeah. I mean, I can relate to that. I'm sure a lot of people either listening to this show or certainly the people who have been on the show can relate to that. I was actually the other day scrolling through my own LinkedIn profile, as I always do, just to make sure everything is up to date. And I was looking at the time, like the time I spent working for places, and I had been doing internships since I was 18 years old in college. I worked at Bear Stearns back in the day when they were still around, and then they were disappeared, and I worked at JP Morgan just as an intern. I worked at immigration firms in law school. I feel like my identity when I was younger was always going to be towards the corporate life. I grew up in New York, so you see people wearing suits. It's just part of the culture here. And when I look at my LinkedIn profile, by far the majority of my life professionally has been working for myself. And so it's really interesting to think about how, even though I always associated myself with the corporate life, my drive was actually, like you said, just to be fully involved. And I would be so bored when I couldn't be fully involved because my work was just here and I wanted to be everywhere. So I can 100% relate to that. And funny enough, when I was practicing immigration law, I had all these ideas about networking and marketing, and like I wanted to build the firm. And I just started practice. I barely knew what I was doing from a lawyer standpoint, but I had all these ideas about the practice, and I got similar feedback. They're like, okay, buddy, like thanks for the ideas, but you have to get back to work because your clients are waiting for your cases. And I think that's when I realized that although I love being an attorney and I loved helping my clients, my internal drive was like to step out and do the bigger picture. I only want to do as much work as I need to learn about how that piece fits into the big picture. But once I learn it, I'm bored. After that, it's just repeating the same thing in my mind over and over again. So I guess at some point you must have said, okay, I've done this long enough. I've built a number of businesses or, projects, whatever you want to, however you call them. I've now done this internally within McKinsey. It's time for me to start thinking about an idea? Or was it the other way around where you sort of had this idea for what would become Tukki and it just, ate at you. And finally you kind of like, how did you get to, making that transition?
So actually, there's an intermediate stage between those two things that, some years ago when I was doing all these, leap projects, majority of a team a lot of times were, software engineers because, we were building tech products and, the first, 10 of the 20 first employees, maybe 15 were technical, right? And when I went to those meetings, right, the plannings or, dailies or whatnot, like at some point I stopped understanding what they were saying, right? Like I had no idea. Like they started talking about technical stuff and I was like, and, I thought like, look, if I want to at some point build a tech startup, I need to understand this. Like I cannot lead a company of people that, the majority of people that work at my company, like I don't know what they do, right? So I started coding. I started learning to code. So for a few years, I went for a few boot camps, these long boot camps of like 9 months, like doing the entire thing. And I learned how to code. Actually, I met some friends there that are actually the first Tukki employees, right? The first coders I met there. So then when I'm telling you this because I really wanted to have that before building it, because I knew I wanted to do like a tech business. I didn't exactly know what type of business, but I knew I wanted to do like a, high potential tech enabled or pure tech business. And I wanted to understand that, right? I think this came from at some point. I organized like a thing called Miami Tech Hub with McKinsey, right? That we were doing things with startups and pitch nights and talks and whatnot. And we brought Gary Briggs, that he used to be the CMO he was the first CMO for Facebook. And he was working as a McKinsey advisor at the time. So we brought him in to do a conversation, and we were having a conversation in front of the audience and whatnot. And he shared his experience of being a tech CEO at some point and how he failed miserably. And he actually said, like, look, I think my main problem was like I didn't understand tech. All my employees were tech people, and I didn't have like a co-founder, right? That was that for me. And I was like, oh no, I don't want to be that person, right? I need to learn from what he's saying. And then I went on this quest for a few years. And then when I got there, right, when I got there to the place where I was comfortable enough with tech to understand, then I quit McKinsey. But when I quit McKinsey, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I didn't have an idea yet. But I knew I wanted to do something. And I said, like, look, I'm going to spend 6 to 7 months, worst case scenario, looking for an idea that excites me to work on. And if in 7 months, like 6, 7 months, like I don't have an idea, like I'll do something else. I'll figure it out, right? Like, I don't know. But funny enough, the first weekend, like after that decision, right, I went to a hackathon organized by Techstars, an AI hackathon in Austin. And I went with a friend. And, that morning, my friend was asking me like, hey, do you have any idea, right, for the hackathon today to present, right? And I texted her, right, like, look, I don't, but if I had to do anything, I would do something about immigration because my process was like so bad and so stressful. And I had such a bad experience. And I know so many people that had bad experiences with that. Like I would definitely like to do something with AI and immigration, right? And I went to the hackathon, and there was other group of people that also had the same idea. So we worked together. during the weekend. And I worked as a coder there because I wanted to experience like what it was to code instead of like do business, and it was fun. And we won the hackathon. We actually won the hackathon. Like, it was the number one of the, 20, 25 startups, or
Wow.
groups actually. And I was like, hey, there's maybe something here, like maybe there's something here. And then, that's how I started, and started, talking with more people, convinced myself that there was something here. I was finishing this second bootcamp at the time. And I, gathered these friends I met. Hey, do you want to come work for me? Like, I'll pay you, something, to work. And that's how we started. And, a little later on, a very good friend from McKinsey joined me as a co-founder and CTO. He's way more, he has a PhD in computer science. Like, he's a real technical guy that really understands what's happening. And that's how we started, I think, now talking about this with you, Roman, like, it's funny how, every time, you think you're going for something, but you end up doing something else, and you don't know like why something happens, or you think you're going to accomplish a certain objective, and more often than not, it ends up leading you to another path, right? But I don't know, that's an interesting part of life, I guess.
And if you surround yourself, I think, with good people, and if you put yourself in good opportunities, if you go off of your path and find some other surprising thing, the likelihood that that surprising thing will be positive or better than what you originally planned is pretty high. I feel like a lot of, there's a lot of people who say like, okay, what is luck? Do you make your own luck? Is it so? And I don't know yet what I believe, but I do believe that you can't get lucky if you sit around at home and wait for it to come knocking on the door. I feel like you have to try and put yourself out there and put energy out into the world by traveling to Texas, or putting on an event, or talking to somebody, traveling 5 hours by boat to Montevideo to have lunch, because that lunch changed your whole trajectory of your life. I mean, you decided not to do a thing, and I think were you lucky? I don't know. So I definitely agree with you. It's like, life has surprises like that.
Yeah, look, there's a phrase I love that is like, the sun is going to come up, whether you like it or not, but
right.
you need to raise your curtains in order to see it, right? So I think it's a combination, right? Like, I think I've been super lucky, and at the same time, there was some responsibility in myself to do my part, right? I had to do my part. But then a lot of things happen down the way, like you meet people, or someone helps you, or someone gives you an opportunity, or something for sure just happens, right? But yeah, you need to do your part, I guess.
Okay, so I know you guys are at the ground stages, so you're getting off the ground. That's partly why I'm excited to talk to you, and why we spent so much time talking about your journey up to this point, rather than about all the different features. I know it's going to continue to grow, but today, in the very near future, because I want people to check out Tukki and visit it and talk to you. What does the company do? What's your mission? How does it work? Talk a little bit about the company.
Yes. So what we do is we manage, or we help manage immigration cases, right, for immigrants and companies. So we work with lawyers, right? And the idea for us is to streamline every potential inefficiency that is there in the journey, from the first conversation between the lawyer and the immigrant or the company, to the filing, RFE, or whatever continuation, right, in the immigration process. So what we think is that because of how the process is set up today, with very low technology, very little technology, and all the intricacies of the process, right, that there's like questions from the immigrant, and maybe the paralegals and the lawyer are buried with work, and they cannot really respond quickly, or maybe they are using Google Drive, or some software just for the form, but another software to upload the files, and there's not a place to explain some things. There's so much back and forth, and so many inefficiencies or things that could be solved through technology, and so many things that could be much faster with the help of AI, right? And that's basically our entire thesis, right? We want to work with lawyers to improve the quality of applications, to reduce the number of mistakes, and to make applications much faster than before, right? And overall, to provide a much better experience to the immigrants and companies, right? And when you talk with them, they are not usually great stories, right? They were like, dude, like it was horrible, and some things because the lawyer was too busy, some things because of the actual process that is very, cumbersome and it's long, and by itself it's a complicated process, right? So that's kind of what we do, right? Like if I don't think, when I see how my own process was, or when I see multiple friends or people I've talked to, like when you ask them how their process was immigrating and the actual like preparing the application, I don't think it's radically different from how it was like 20 years ago or 15 years ago, right? It's pretty similar. And it shouldn't be, right? There should be, like, we have so many new technologies. AI is a big one, right? But even other things, right? About how we can manage software. And we want to, do things differently. We want to be the next frontier of what it means to prepare an application from every side, right? From the side of the company, from the side of the immigrant, and from the side of the lawyer. Like lawyers spend a ton of time on things that are not really value added, right? Like answering a quick email about the same question they'd answered like 50 times, reviewing paperwork, like doing a ton of things that are not really using their education for. Maybe you spend like 20% of your time really like, doing something that really requires you to be a lawyer. And then the 80% of the time is like doing other things. So we want to take all of that 80%, manage it entirely ourselves, and work together with lawyers so lawyers can do what they do best, right? Like, I know, like, a ton of things and it's super valuable what you know. Let's work with you on that and let me handle everything else, and automate as much as we can and apply technology and give a great experience to everyone. And we just want to be that bridge, that bridge in between to make the entire process better. Like that's kind of the aspiration.
And so what can a user or a client, I suppose, like expect? And I don't mean in terms of screens and buttons. I'm talking about process.
Yeah.
They upload things, that something's automated, something's AI generated. There's a connection with the lawyer. Like what is that a little bit?
Yeah. So first, you have a platform where you do everything. You fill the forms, you upload the documents, you ask your questions, you have a ton of tooltips, a ton of explanations, you have AI assistants. So you have a ton of like offline assistants, like you don't need a person to ask for. Like, but when you read the forms, like they are not so clear, right? Like I don't think USCIS is particularly user friendly, right? The forms and explanations and namings. And so I think just by having a friendly platform with a ton of explanations, with a ton of like even an AI assistant to help you understand some things, showing you examples, and then being able to interact directly through the platform, like, hey, I have a question here, and then the paralegal, answer, or the lawyer answers to you pretty quickly within the platform. Being able to upload everything within the platform and provide context, right? Like, for example, we are starting with a focus more on the talent visas, right? So with the O1, the EB1A, and EB2 national interest waiver. And there's a ton of evidence, right? And typically what happens is that you upload all your documentation to a Google Drive, and then the lawyer and paralegal starts reading it and analyzing and summarizing it. And they're going to have questions. Like some things are not self-explanatory. So that requests that they reach out to you 1 month after you submit it, and then all these things start to pile on. So the idea is, you have the initial conversation with one of our lawyers. When we say our, it's not our, like, our contractors, right? Because we're not a law firm. So we have our third-party lawyers, completely independent, that work with our clients, right? So there's a meeting with, for example, with myself, with a lawyer, and with the customer. We set up the strategy, right? Because we really want to have a lawyer like drafting the strategy and making sure we're going on the right path and the right, that's one of the critical points where you really want a lawyer, an expert in this, that is licensed and really knows what to do. And after that, like the entire process is through the platform, and you have all these helps and a much better UX to upload documents. And some little thing, right, that I don't think is that little. Typically, I've seen lawyers work in a waterfall way, right? Waterfall meaning, the immigrant prepares everything. They send everything to, they are 1 month gathering evidence and preparing everything. They send everything to you, and then You and your paralegal start to work there another whole month, and then you get back. But you could just improve it. If you could just make it parallel, right? But if you don't have an organized platform that you can have everything ready, making sure you're not going to work again, it's very hard, right? It's very risky because you can make a ton of mistakes, right? So the platform allows for that, right? Hey, this evidence is ready. Start reviewing it. Okay, we mark it as done. Instead of the paralegal manually summarizing it, we have an AI assistant. It does it for it. The paralegal still reviews everything. Like, we believe in the enhanced people, right? Not the replaced people. We still want like an actual paralegal to read the summary of the AI and check, the article, make sure that's okay. And we still want the lawyer to review what the paralegal reviewed and make sure everything's okay, right? But all these things, like reviewing something, it's 10x faster than producing it, right? So the thing is, like, let's make AI produce drafts for everything, so we can really accelerate the time and make a paralegal, instead of making 30, 40 cases a year, make 200 cases a year, and do the process parallel, right? And then when it comes to the lawyer, let's give them like a much better draft of all the evidence, so they can also spend way less time drafting the legal brief, the cover letter or whatever it is that maybe right now they spend a ton of time because the summaries are not that extensive. They need to go back and read and ask a lot of questions. So if we can solve all of that before, we also believe lawyers can do this in a much more efficient way, spending way less hour and producing a better, quality application.
I like that concept of, let's say the individual uploads certain documentation. The platform says, okay, we've got 30% out of 100% of the documentation, but with that 30%, here's some tasks you can already accomplish. Start reviewing it, draft, this and that, while the client continues to provide evidence. And so, for folks who don't know, waterfall, like it's a production methodology, and the flip side is agile, which is just like you do multiple things at the same time. And I do think that looking at the immigration process from almost like a tech development perspective can, do that. So it's cool that so the platform effectively, and I'm sure this will change again. I'm asking you questions that maybe will be developed more so over time as the company matures. But the idea will be that the platform, that Tukki, will know what's ready to be done, and like it'll sort of help facilitate that with the team of attorneys and paralegals.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry.
Yeah, and maybe even tickle the client to say, hey, you still owe these documents. Here's what's in process, but we still will need this from you. So please, whatever.
Yeah, and some details about that, right? Like, you have the opportunity to help the client or the immigrant or company understand what they did wrong on the first time, so they can fix it for the next 20 evidences, instead of like making them do the mistake on the 20 evidences and then they need to rework in a month when they didn't even remember, they don't even remember like what they did or where the evidence was, and they need to, to fix it for the other 20. So I do think like AI is going to be a significant part of like accelerating things, especially on our side, and clarifying questions on their side. But I do think like there's so many things about just basic process and how to structure things and how to work and how to make a process more efficient and with a better UX for everyone, that is going to provide a ton of value, right? So yeah, like so far the experience we're seeing is great. Like, we've had some initial customers, not yet with the platform because we didn't have it ready. I was the manual paralegal, which was actually great because I learned so much about being a paralegal and what it takes. But now we are starting this week with our first 2 clients going through the platform.
This week?
This week. Actually, I have the kickoff call in 2 hours.
Wow. All right.
That's going to be great, to learn.
The GMI Rocket Show is the launching pad of
Exactly.
new platforms. So it's a good, the rocket. It's the rocket ship that goes into space. That's very cool. That's very exciting. So then let me ask you, for folks who are listening and watching, whether they're immigration attorneys, paralegals, folks on staff, or they are immigrants, so folks on particular visa type, or maybe companies and in-house, do you like, who is the best person to start looking at Tukki and, maybe talking to you guys, considering you guys, obviously you work with at least one immigration attorney as a kind of a partner, a consultant. Maybe that'll grow as the platform continues to grow. So who should be paying attention to you right now?
Yeah, by the way, we have an awesome immigration attorney called Jose De Witt, that he is not only a partner as a lawyer, but he's an advisor with us. And he's helping us build this thing, right? He's not only working with us as a lawyer, but he's being incredibly helpful and fundamental, I would say, to being able to build this, right? Like building this without something with such, big track record and experience, it would be very hard, right? So that's big shout out to him. But yeah, at some point, we're going to expand, and we're going to continue having like even more lawyers when we have like more volume and whatnot. But I would say today, definitely immigrants, definitely, small companies, I would say, because we're not targeting large companies because we don't think we're ready. Like our main goal is to provide the best quality application and the best experience. And I don't think today we're ready to do that for a large company. So that's why we're not targeting companies today. Maybe we will in 12 to 18 months, but not today. So I would say, immigrants or even companies that we can partner up, right? You are a bookkeeper or you are providing services to startups or to other companies, and we can partner up to do that for your clients. And definitely, lawyers and paralegals and other people from the industry, it's always great to talk with everyone, right? And learn from them and see what type of partnerships we can do and grow together, right? Like the idea is to, of course, we want to be successful as a company, but hopefully we want to improve the ecosystem and the industry as a whole and help where we can, right?
Amen. I think, I'm the first person to tell you that I think the network effect of everyone in the industry, whether it's, you and I who are relatively new or very new in this space, to people who've been doing technology and immigration and lawyers who've been practicing for decades, we can all learn from each other. We obviously can learn from their experience. They may be able to learn about newer tools and more cutting edge things from us. And I think the collaboration, one thing that is important to me is this whole abundance mindset. I don't love to use buzzwords, but I do find that a lot of people in the industry think that, well, it's either your case or my case. If I'm eating, that's because you're not eating. But I think we can all eat. I think there's a huge unserved and underserved market within that needs immigration services, and more tech products, more options will just give access to more people to use it, rather than me stealing your client or you stealing my client. So, I definitely agree with you. I want to ask you one more question, and then we can, end this conversation. I think it's been awesome. And, learning about you and your journey has been, it's so interesting, and finding the parallels between your journey coming from the music space and, probably at that time thinking with blindfolds on, saying, I'm going to be a professional, composer, then conductor, and then open a school. And then now you find yourself here. And what do you think, like, top of mind for you is the most recent piece of advice that you've sort of heard and that you're sort of trying to implement right now?
I think, there's more often than not, there's water in the pool, right? Like typically people don't want to jump into the pool, and that, like you don't want to risk yourself because you're afraid that, maybe things will go wrong. And there's a statistic I love that, 80% of the problems that you fear like never happen, right? And, my life has been full of like jumping into the pool, right? Like doing a abrupt change, to an completely unknown arena. And I didn't know if it was going to be successful, if it's going to be a complete failure. And I'm not saying that every time is going to be a success, but I think we think things are riskier than they are. And I think there's great satisfaction in just asking yourself, if you were going to die in 10 years, like what would you've done, right, in this situation? And, I do my best to follow that piece of advice every single day. And every time I follow it, I notice I'm happier than when I don't follow it, right? So I think, it's not that bad, right? And even if you don't succeed, I think it's worth just trying and doing it. And, so many times you end up, as we were discussing before, you end up doing something completely different. So you don't really have any idea of what's going to happen anyway.
Right.
So I think just following your gut and just trying things that you're passionate about, it's a great way of increasing happiness in your life.
And hopefully leading to success as well
Hopefully.
at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, hopefully, but even if it doesn't, right?
Right.
Just by doing it, right? I'm having the time of my life building Tukki, like
Right.
hopefully it will be successful. I think it will be successful. It is going super successfully so far. But even if it weren't, right, I am very happy that I took the leap of faith of like leaving McKinsey and just, have a very good career and a very good job and something I enjoyed very much, to doing something that I always wanted to do, right? So I think just that journey is worth it. And of course, if you also are successful at the end, that's great, right? But most of it is the journey. So the most important part is that. And then if at the end of the journey there's a great thing, that's awesome. But it's not worth it, right, to suffer the entire journey just to have a great outcome, because the majority, 90% of the time, is going to be before.
That's right. Amen.
Oh, you muted yourself for a second. Yeah.
I want to say thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. I very much resonate with that, and I hope that others listening to it, whether they're currently building a startup in the space or thinking about it, I initially started the show for myself, in the sense that I didn't have a show about startups in our space to learn from, to listen to maybe to hear about the stories. So if there's somebody thinking about doing something in immigration, do it.
Yeah.
Do it. Think about the benefit, and you're going to make the whole industry a better place. So thank you, Ramiro. I appreciate you being here.
No, thanks to you,
Thank
Roman. Really appreciate the invite.
Awesome. I also want to do a quick thank you again to the main sponsor for this episode, Lex Reception. So Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and support service. They answer phone calls and messages in real time. They'll schedule appointments for you. They support immigration lawyers at 24/7 legal answering specialists. So, you as an immigration professional, you don't have to worry about missing a call from a client or prospect ever again. They reach out to clients on your behalf proactively, which is awesome. And they have a number of tech integrations with Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and more to really help you integrate with your tech stack. So check out Lex Reception, $250 off your first month of service for folks coming from the GMI Rocket Show. So check out the link in the show description, or just reach out to them directly. Thank you all so much for being here, for listening, for tuning in, for the questions. I really didn't get a chance to get to this, Marianella. I'm so sorry, but really interesting startup addressing a need in the market. I totally agree with you. Thank you for the comment. Thank you, everybody, for listening, for tuning in, for your comments. We have a lot of great shows and episodes coming up in 2024. I'm excited for it. This was the first one of the year with an awesome company. Check them out, Tukki.ai, Tukki.ai, and reach out to Ramiro as well. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend and stay safe.